There's no problem too big or small, no issue too hot or cold, and no subject these gentlemen won't talk about. Let's head into the lab to see what they're working to figure out today.
Let's get into it and get down to it. Welcome to Figure It Out. This is George Grombacher. Joining us in spirit today is Centauri Minor. He's my podcast partner, but he was not able to make it. Helping us move from awareness to action today is Jim Manley, Senior Attorney at the Goldwater Institute. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks for having me.
Excited to have you. In your bio, it says that for more than a decade, he has been fighting to protect and expand freedom. That's a pretty awesome thing to have in your bio. So.
Yeah, I think human freedom is our most important asset, so I've dedicated my life to protecting and expanding it. It's also a lot of fun. So.
Mm-hmm. And you are I don't want to butcher it, a constitutional litigator?
That's fair, yeah. I litigate First Amendment issues, taxpayer protection issues, and did a bit of Second Amendment litigation in my previous life, and so yeah, all sorts of constitutional litigation.
Got it. Okay, nice. One day potentially argue in front of the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I filed briefs in front of the Supreme Court. I've argued in front of 2 state Supreme Courts.
Nice.
So, yeah,
Very
maybe
cool.
one day.
So we were talking a little bit offline about the Goldwater Institute, and I think that a lot of people are aware of it, but maybe not exactly sure what you guys really do. So give us a rundown of what's going on here.
Yeah, well, the Goldwater Institute was founded in 1988 as a think tank, and with the blessing of Senator Goldwater. And in 2007, we started litigating, mainly under state constitutions, because what we realized was that some rights are protected by the federal constitution, but not in a robust way, especially rights to economic liberty, the right to earn a living, to go out and hang your shingle. And so we've been litigating under both state and federal constitutions since 2007. And in the last 3 or 4 years, we started litigating outside the state of Arizona, in places as far away as Massachusetts, Georgia, North Dakota, Colorado, New Jersey, Texas, so all across the country now. And we also still have the think tank running at full steam, and we've got a lot of legislative policy that comes out of the think tank, both here in Arizona and nationally.
Got it. So you have your radar up, and when you see an issue that you feel is unjust, you throw your hat in the ring and you get involved.
Yeah, well, we litigate on all sorts of issues, and so if an issue comes up somewhere else in the country, we jump on that. We're fighting against the medical monopoly in Georgia, where hospitals are preventing a surgery center from expanding. We're fighting against subsidies to public employee unions in Texas and New Jersey, and we've been litigating First Amendment issues for a long time, and that's sort of what got us interested in our current main First Amendment project, which is campus speech.
Got it. Now, just we're going to spend the majority of our time talking about that, but what motivated you to go outside of Arizona?
Well, the reason we went outside of Arizona is that we've had a lot of success here, and so we wanted to export that success to the rest of the country. There's no reason we should hoard all this freedom here in Arizona.
Nice. Okay. So freedom of speech on college campus. Do you think that a lot of people are aware of what's going on? Is it now starting to bubble to the surface?
Well, I think now people are aware. Every group that I talk to is already interested in the issue before I start speaking. And so we introduced a model bill at the end of January, January 31st. And 2 days later, UC Berkeley was on fire because Milo Yiannopoulos was scheduled to give a talk there.
Mm-hmm.
And so our timing was pretty good. And since then, there have just been incident after incident where we've had shout downs and speaker disinvitations and these sort of violent protests. And then you add something that, the tragedy that occurred in Charlottesville on top of that, and it's really become a national conversation over basically the limits of free speech.
Mm-hmm. So it's like, how do you start to unpack this? But I read a survey that a group did. I'm not going to give a citation because I didn't write it down, but 20% of the students, current undergraduates, said that violence was acceptable to prevent people from speaking. And that's obviously problematic.
I think so. I think anybody who values free expression, who values a civil society, who values rational discourse, will be upset by that figure. And even just 20% is obviously a minority, but that's more than enough to have a total breakdown of civil discussion on campus, and we've seen that time and again. You've got a few students who disrupt a lecture by just shouting nonstop so that the speaker can't even continue to talk. And that, I think, is just one step short of the sort of violence that we've seen at Berkeley and some other places. It's force, and it's the opposite of reason, the opposite of discourse.
Right. So if you were to distill this whole problem down, could you succinctly say, here's really what the issue is?
Well, if you want to get very broad and distill it down to the essence, it is reason versus violence. It is the question of whether we're going to have a rational discussion about issues or whether we're going to attack people that we disagree with. And I mean, I think that is the question. So are we going to have a lecture and then questions, a give and take, or are we going to have a shout down? Are we going to have a riot, or are we going to have a discussion? And I think our history as a country shows that the choice of rational discussion is more productive, and obviously it's closer to our national values.
Right. Okay. And another piece that came out of that article that I read, it said that if speech is violence, then violence becomes a justifiable response to speech.
Yeah, this idea that certain kinds of speech is the same as violence is an anti-concept that just wipes away this whole discussion. And if you do buy into that idea that some speech is the same as violence because it basically because it hurts people's feelings,
right?
Well, then yeah, certainly throwing Molotov cocktails is justified, but I think that's a false equivalency. Ideas have the ability to stir up strong emotions in people, but they don't have the ability to physically harm someone, violate someone's rights. The proper response to speech that you disagree with is more speech, is to counter those
right.
ideas with your own ideas.
Use your words.
Yeah.
So,
well, and it's funny you bring up that sort of schoolyard etiquette. That is what we're getting at here. One of the principles that we enshrine in our model bill is take turns. If you disagree with the speaker, don't shout the speaker down. Ask questions afterwards. Set up an alternative event. Protest in a way that doesn't disrupt the speaker, but let him have his time to say his piece, and then take your turn to say your piece. It really is that simple.
Mm-hmm. So how did we get here? How did all this happen?
Well, I think that's a more difficult question than we can unpack in the time that we have, and it may be a more difficult question than anyone can really tease out, that sort of cause and effect. Some of the impulses that we see that sort of give rise to this hostility to dissenting views, this idea that sort of Western civilization is inherently racist and doesn't honor the contributions of all peoples, and because of that, anything that comes out of Western civilization is discounted in certain circles, and I think that ignores this whole concept of dialogue and this whole concept of debate. And you can have a problem with certain aspects of Western history. I mean, I think everyone should have problems
right.
with certain aspects of it, but you don't get rid of those problems by ignoring them or pretending that they don't exist or pretending that that certain terrible ideas didn't really transcend the culture at certain times. We have to understand that history in order to move past it. And there's some, I think, resistance to this idea that we should have a full discussion about both historical views and current views. I think people want to just pretend that these terrible views don't exist, and pretend that we get rid of them by ignoring them. And that doesn't work. You don't cure a disease by pretending it doesn't exist. You study it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get rid of a bad idea by just plugging your fingers in your ears.
By yelling at it.
Right.
Got it. So you mentioned UC Berkeley, and Milo Yiannopoulos and Ben Shapiro just spoke there, and they spent $600,000 on security for that event, which is crazy. I think that one of the things that is very confusing to everyone, because we don't all study constitutional law and understand these things, is what speech is really protected. Is hate speech protected? I think a lot of people, when you survey them, half of them would say that no, that's not protected by the First Amendment. Can you clear that up a little bit for us?
Yeah. So I think this got the most recent visiting by Howard Dean, who was talking about or tweeted that hate speech isn't protected by the Constitution, which is absolutely false. The Constitution doesn't protect certain kinds of false speech like defamation or libel. It doesn't protect incitement to imminent lawless action, but it absolutely protects people's views that are racist, that are abhorrent to most values that the Constitution enshrines or that most people hold dear. There is no content-based limit to the First Amendment, so you can say really terrible things, and it's protected by the First Amendment. You can even trademark racial slurs, as the Supreme Court just decided, and that's protected by the First Amendment. So a group called the Slants was applied for a trademark for their name, and it's an Asian band that's trying to sort of reclaim that derogatory term, and
Okay.
Their application was turned down. And so the hate speech people would say, well, great, well, the First Amendment doesn't protect terrible racial slurs like that. And what the Supreme Court decided was no, the First Amendment doesn't make those distinctions. It protects all speech as long as it's not inciting violence or libeling someone. And so the Supreme Court overturned that decision and allowed their application for a trademark to be granted.
Okay. So can you give me an example of what it means to incite violence?
So, like I said, it's incitement to imminent lawless action. So it's encouraging people to immediately take a violent step. So somebody standing on the courthouse steps calling for a mob to go burn down the courthouse.
Okay.
Short of that, short of imminent lawless action, there's a lot of latitude. There's the idea of even violent political protest violent words that suggest that there was a case where a draft protester during the Vietnam War said if they put a rifle in my hands, the first person I want to get in my sights is Johnson, and the Supreme Court held that was protected expression, even though it sounds very violent. It's political vitriol, so it's protected by the Constitution.
Right. He wasn't saying that I'm going to go get a rifle and take a shot at the president. He was saying that if I get a rifle, then that's what I will do. Got it. So an example could be somebody on stage pointing to a group of people and saying, hey, you guys pick up a rock and hit that guy in the head.
Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah.
That would be not
incitement
protected
to imminent lawless action, but short of that, then the speech is protected. Saying that a group of people, deserves to be hit over the head with rocks, is not inciting to imminent lawless action. Probably it would depend on the context,
Right.
but that would fall short of an immediate threat.
Okay. So when people are talking about hate speech, a lot of the time in these examples of people protesting a speaker that they don't like coming to college campus, they say, well, I'm not going to put up with that hate speech. And whether or not the person coming that's relevant whatsoever, or in the case of Ben Shapiro, they call him a white supremacist, which is not the case. But if Richard Spencer, a member of the alt-right, did come to your campus and was just talking about his views of the alt-right, while it may be derogatory and you may not like it, that's getting labeled as hate speech. Is that kind of the environment that we're in right now?
Well, and as a term, hate speech is kind of an empty term. I don't really know what it means, and if you wanted to outlaw hate speech, you would have to appoint someone to be the censor to decide what ideas are off limits. And I don't know anyone I would nominate for that task. I don't think anyone would pick me to decide for them what ideas they could hear. So just calling something hate speech doesn't exclude it from the protections of the First Amendment. I think somebody like Richard Spencer, I think if he wants to come to your campus, that's an opportunity for you to engage him in some really embarrassing debate, because his ideas are incredibly thin, incredibly poorly researched, and I think students are missing an opportunity to really engage and put him on the spot and ask him tough questions if they try to get his event shut down. That's not to say that I would want to invite him to my campus, but if he's there, if he's spreading his ideas, better to confront him and challenge him than to just let him spew into the echo chamber.
And that's, I think, what's so frustrating about what's going on campus right now is instead of having that robust dialogue, debate, whatever you want to call it, conversation about things, we just don't want to hear it because it's triggering, it's violating our safe space, things like that. Do you think that the administration of universities, the professors, have a hand in this? I don't know if that's beyond the scope of this or not, but
well, no, and I do think that I've read some discussions and talked to some students who say that this really isn't coming from the student body, that it's more the professors who are pushing this idea of that certain views are off limits, and that we just don't discuss certain ideas that are outside the campus mainstream. So I think the students are really the ones that are losing out here. They get called snowflakes, and I don't think that this is really their fault, and I don't think it was even their idea. They have certainly embraced it, but because they've been dropped into this environment where professors and administrators are trying to protect them from these ideas that make them uncomfortable. The university should be doing the exact opposite. They should be putting these students in tough situations so that they learn how to deal with views that they disagree with, so that they learn how to have a robust and civil dialogue. And I don't think that it's too much of a stretch to say that the reason we have such little political dialogue in our country, in our government, is because we've lost that tradition of debate and of civil confrontation, of a battle of ideas.
Got it. How is a public university different than a private university in this?
Well, in our view, a private university can order its affairs in any way that it likes. And so the private universities aren't covered by the First Amendment, and they've got broad latitude to have whatever policies they want. Now, as it turns out, a lot of the private universities, Yale, University of Chicago, have much more robust protections for free speech and have issued reports that are really the basis for a lot of our work. And so they're doing a great job of protecting free expression. Now, there are some other examples. Evergreen College that comes to mind as one where private institutions are falling short. But for public universities, they are governed by the First Amendment, by the Constitution generally, and so their authority is limited in the same way that the state legislature's authority is limited, and so they have to abide by the First Amendment when they're making these decisions that impact speech.
Got it. Okay, fair enough. Do you think that just in all this, a rise of alt-right, white supremacist groups, does that have anything to do with this? Is that taking place?
Well, certainly it has something to do with it because these are the groups that are generally being attacked. But if you take Evergreen State College, for example, that has nothing to do with white supremacy. Brett Weinstein is a progressive. All he said was perhaps people shouldn't be judged or excluded from campus based on the color of their skin.
Mm-hmm.
I don't take that as a white supremacist view at all. I don't take that as an alt-right view at all. I think that's sort of a basic value of our Constitution, at least since the Civil Rights Movement. And so it does seem to go beyond the alt-right, but obviously they get the headlines, and the most vitriolic reaction we see from campuses is focused on them. But for us, what's at stake is the principle of free expression, and that's what's at stake in all of our First Amendment litigation is this idea that more speech is better, and we should be engaging in a dialogue rather than having speech be restricted. So these alt-right types have certainly sensationalized the issue. But I think the issue would still be there even if these folks weren't making headlines.
Got it. So what has the Goldwater Institute done?
Well, we started off addressing a small issue here in Arizona with free speech zones. And this is where college campuses set aside a tiny little area of the campus for speech activities. And some students at Paradise Valley Community College were handing out constitutions, but they were not in the free speech zone. So the university arrested them. And
Really?
Really. So you can't hand
Get
out
in the back of the
constitutions
cop car
unless you're in the free speech zone.
Yeah.
And
Yikes.
So we helped craft and pass a law that eliminates free speech zones. And so now the whole campus is a free speech zone. You don't check your First Amendment rights if you step outside of the First Amendment box on
Wow.
campus. And when we were involved in that fight, we realized that it's a broader problem. And Stanley Kurtz, our co-author on our model bill, he got in touch with us, and he's been looking at this issue for years and years. He's been an academic for years. He writes for National Review Online and has been following this issue. And so he got in touch with us, and we started talking about all of the ways in which these anti-speech policies are playing out on campus. And we crafted a model bill with Stanley that addresses free speech on campus broadly. It addresses the problem of speaker shout-downs, of disinvitations where a group invites a speaker to campus and the administration isn't willing to stand up to the hecklers, isn't willing to provide the security that's necessary to have the event go forward, and so the event gets canceled and the mob wins. Address this idea of free speech zones, address this idea of speech codes where harassment is defined so broadly that really anything that offends someone can be sanctionable. And we saw that here in Arizona. The University of Arizona put out a description for speech police, basically. Students who were going to be paid by the residential life department to basically monitor dorm room bowl sessions and make sure they didn't get too heated.
Wow.
And if someone said something that was harassing, that was triggering, then these speech police could report them. They've pulled that pretty quickly for some reason.
Yeah, oddly enough.
Oddly enough, yeah. But
seemed like a good idea at the time.
And so then we're also getting at this issue of institutional neutrality, and occasionally this doesn't happen as often as some of these other problems, but public universities are funded by taxpayers, and they shouldn't be taking positions on issues of public importance, because the taxpayers shouldn't be dragged along to sponsor that speech that they might disagree with. And worse still, if the university takes an official position on something, on like, say, investment in fossil fuels, for example, then the students and the professors might feel an obligation to go along with that official line, that official position, and may even be compelled to do so in certain circumstances. So our bill calls for institutional neutrality as well, so that the university doesn't take controversial positions. Now, there's some wiggle room there in the bill, but we want to instill that idea of neutrality as a central value. And by sort of wiping away these speech codes as the first step, these broad harassment policies, and replacing them with a discussion of the importance of free expression, of a dialogue about dialogue, right at the beginning, right at freshman orientation, sort of reset the conversation around the First Amendment, and hopefully start students off in their freshman year with this idea that dialogue is what's important, that robust debate is going to be part of this college experience, that you may have your feelings hurt, but in the end you're going to be stronger for it. That is what we're really trying to accomplish in the long term. In the short term, we also think that it's necessary to have some discipline procedures in place to punish students who engage in shout downs. And it's also important to have due process protections, though, for students who are accused of violating the free expression rights of others, because that's a whole other issue that has been bubbling up lately, this problem of campus due process, and the total lack of anything resembling due process, of a fair trial, of the ability to have a lawyer, the ability to even see the evidence against you. And so we have strong due process protections in place as well.
Got it.
So
Okay.
there's a lot going on here with this bill, but it's designed to be sort of a comprehensive approach.
Okay. So you're drafting the bill, and then theoretically speaking, anybody could take your language and put it through the state level?
Right.
At any state?
Yeah, we wrote the model bill, and it's sort of some provisions that are adaptable to each state. North Carolina has passed it into law, and about half a dozen other states are looking at it as well. It's working through the process in Wisconsin, in Michigan. The legislature passed it by overwhelming margins in Louisiana, and the governor vetoed it. And he didn't explain exactly why, but the objections that we get to the bill come from the universities. And they don't like the bill for a couple of reasons. They don't like this idea that they're not doing a good job protecting free expression, even though the record is absolutely clear that there are problems here.
Right.
And they don't like this idea that the legislature is going to tell them that they have to take the First Amendment seriously, that the legislature shouldn't be involved shouldn't meddle in the internal affairs of the university, which is just astonishing, because the legislature has a duty to protect our constitutional rights. And if another level of government that the legislature has responsibility for overseeing isn't protecting constitutional rights, the legislature absolutely has to step in and provide guidelines. And the universities, they like to think that they sort of function on their own off here without any adult supervision, but
right.
The legislature has authority over the state universities for a reason, and it's important that they take it seriously. But the universities bristle at this idea that they need oversight, and so I think that's part of the reason that the bill got vetoed in Louisiana.
That's interesting.
Yeah, but we're planning to bring it back, and we're planning to bring it back in at least half a dozen other states this coming session, including Arizona.
Got it. So how do you get that into the hands of, let's just use an example, in Iowa?
Mm-hmm.
here in Arizona, you've crafted this awesome model bill. How do you let Iowa know? Hey, Iowa.
It's funny actually. We as I said, we released the model bill in January, at the end of January, and there were 8 states that had picked it up within a couple of weeks, and most of the time it was just a legislator looking for a solution to this free speech problem, and their staff or the legislator found our bill because there really wasn't anyone else offering this sort of comprehensive solution to these problems. No one else really had an idea about how to fix this problem, and so it really grew organically. We've done a little bit more to try to push the bill out there this session, but it blew up much more quickly than we expected it to, in part because the issue just ignited after the Milo event and everything that came after that.
Right. Well, shame on me for not realizing that was completed in January. How long did it take you to write it?
We started writing it in 2016, sort of maybe around this time, 2016, doing the research and the crafting of the language. And it was a process. It was a collaborative process between myself, Jonathan Butcher, and Stanley Kurtz, and some of the other folks here at Goldwater. And so, with all those cooks in the kitchen, it takes a while to get things figured out.
Can only imagine.
Yeah, and we did a lot of research into this issue to try to understand what were the best practices. And as I said, a lot of that research came from reports that came out of Yale and Chicago, and then also just looking at what the state of the law was and where we could improve things from the sort of the baseline protections that courts have recognized.
Got it. Let's just say that there's a group that is opposite of your beliefs. What would their criticisms of the bill be? Just to play devil's advocate.
Sure. Well, we have an FAQ on our website that sort of goes through the
Okay.
common objections that we get. So, to find a group that's really opposite of our view on this is difficult outside of the university, because really what the bill does is protect free expression broadly for both protesters and invited speakers.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the objections that we get, I think, are disingenuous. Some folks just aren't reading the bill. And so when, for example, in our bill, we call for a student who has twice been found responsible for violating the free expression rights of others to either be suspended or expelled.
Okay.
And some people think that that's too harsh a penalty, or that it shouldn't be set in the law. Now, of course, the Woodward report from Yale calls for suspension or expulsion after one shout down. So we gave them a little more latitude here. And then there's this question of whether that would chill protesters' rights to protest. And I absolutely don't want that to happen. I want protesters to have the full ability to present an alternative viewpoint. But what's absolutely clear in the law is that you can set up rules that embody that playground etiquette that we were talking about before,
Mm-hmm.
take turns. You can have time, place, and manner restrictions on speech, where if you can't use a bullhorn in somebody's face to get your point across. You have to do it in a way that is civil. And so that's one of the objections that we get, that we're going to chill protesters' rights. But we haven't given the universities any more authority. We haven't whittled away at any protections that the First Amendment already provides. We've just told the universities, take the First Amendment seriously. And in a lot of these shoutdowns, what the university does is simply stand on the side, and the university police literally will stand there with arms folded and just not do anything.
Yeah.
And just sort of either let the situation burn out on its own, and which sometimes happens, or just let the situation devolve to the point where the event is canceled. That happened at the University of Michigan. The political union put together a debate about whether the tactics of the Black Lives Matter movement were counterproductive. Just the tactics. sort of assuming, I think, in that question that the movement itself had value, and just wondering whether the tactics they're taking are the best ones.
Got it.
The event was shouted down.
Yeah, that's
They
not
couldn't,
happening.
couldn't even have a
Nope.
debate about it. And the university did nothing, absolutely nothing to penalize anyone who was involved in the shout down.
Hands in pockets.
Right. And so that's why we call for the mandatory penalty after two violations, so that the university can't just stand on the sidelines and not do anything. Or take Middlebury, for example, where Charles Murray was shouted down, and the professor who was there to debate him was physically attacked. And the only thing the university did in response was to put a letter in a couple of the students' file. And if they're good for a year, then the letter comes out of their file. So not even a slap on the wrist.
Right.
So that's why we think that it's important to enshrine some guidelines for universities to follow, so that they can start to take this issue seriously.
Right. We're not really telling you what to do, but if you could actually follow the Constitution,
Right.
that'd be great.
Yeah. Do something.
That'd be great. Thanks. Okay. Awesome. Nice. Just because I'm curious, we were talking a little bit about Dave Rubin up front as well, and he's been experiencing a lot of demonetization of his shows on YouTube, and there's been a lot of that going on, or at least that's what I've heard. Do you have any thoughts on that?
You'll have to explain that issue to me. I'm not familiar with it.
So YouTube, it's
Nope. Yeah, I understand
it's-
monetization of YouTube.
right,
but
and it's certainly a private company.
Yeah.
Anything that they deem to be, I suppose, hate speech
Ah.
or harassment or anything along those lines, they demonetize.
Interesting. Okay. Well, yeah, I didn't know that was happening to Dave Rubin. I've watched some of his shows. I'd be surprised. I mean, they're interview shows, right? That's
Right.
It's
One would not consider him to be a somebody who was inciting anything bad.
Well, no. I mean, it's sort of hard to do that when you're having a debate, right? Because when you're having a guest on who, and I know in many episodes I've watched that there's disagreement
Mhm.
presented on the show. So that's surprising to me. I mean, yeah, as you mentioned, YouTube's a private company, so that they can do whatever they like. The beauty of the internet, though, is that there are other outlets for folks to show their support, like Patreon,
right?
and other ways that people can express their displeasure with YouTube's decision. And frankly, you can speak out and tell YouTube how you feel about their decision to demonetize those videos.
Excellent point. So folks that are listening, how can they get involved if they are concerned about this?
Well, absolutely. If we have a bill running in your state, and you can go on our website and check to see if we do, at goldwaterinstitute.org, and absolutely contact your legislators and let them know that you support free expression on campus, that you think this is the right way to protect free expression. So places like Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, California, Arizona, if you're in one of those states where we have a bill running, help us. Let the decision makers know that you think this issue is important. And if we don't have a bill in your state, then get in touch with us and maybe we can fix that problem.
Right.
And this is an issue that sort of goes beyond the legislature too, because if you went to a university and you're writing a check to the alumni fund every year, well, you have more power than you may think to pick up the phone and let the administration know that you think this is an important issue, that you think that they're either doing a great job or not doing enough to protect free expression on campus, or at least let them know, have them tell you what they're doing to protect free expression on campus. Put them on the spot and let them know you're watching them.
Right. Okay. How long is the model bill?
Oh,
Roughly.
it's a fairly short bill, just a few pages, really.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And this
So-
is not one of these congressional bills.
I'm thinking it's this
that's
2,000
pages
page
long,
document. So it's something that the average layperson could pick up and read.
Yeah, very much so. And the bill sets some guidelines and puts it on the universities to develop policies that fit within these guidelines. So the policies that universities come up with can be tailored to what works for that institution, as long as they stick within these guidelines. So I think the bill is very easy to understand, easy enough even for a college administrator to understand it.
Yep, sure. Super easy. Got it. Well, I know that we set out to cover a lot of ground, and I think that we certainly did. What did I not ask that I should have? What should we be talking about that we haven't?
I don't know. We've certainly covered a lot. I mean, I think there's a question here, sort of a deeper question about what sort of society we want to have,
Mm-hmm.
and whether we want to have a society where we're picking an official version of the truth, where we're picking which ideas are acceptable to discuss and which ideas are completely off limits to even discussion. I would rather live in a society where we have robust dialogue about all issues, and where the response to an idea we disagree with is to discuss it and figure out where we're wrong, and figure out where the other person is wrong, and somewhere in there come to the truth. I think if we don't have the freedom to speak and to think, then we're not really free. And if we get closer to a society where we're having to decide what is hate speech, what is the acceptable limits of speech, what is the official version of the truth, then we've given up something that's really very important and very unique to this country, to this
Mm-hmm.
idea of individual autonomy and freedom. So I think it's worth fighting for.
Agreed. Very much agree. Such a wonderful quote that I'm sure that obviously you are aware of, that goes, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it," which is Evelyn Beatrice Hall. It was attributed to Voltaire, but apparently...
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that is the right attribution, and it's absolutely it's the whole reason we're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
To fight for the principle of free expression, not to fight for any particular view.
Right.
I wish we were fighting for different people sometimes, but
Mm-hmm.
The principle of free expression applies to everybody. Applies most urgently to minority views, to views that aren't within the mainstream. We don't need a First Amendment to protect views that we all agree with. We need it to protect the minority views, even if they're terrible and really odious to us.
Right.
That's why we have the legal protections that we do, so that no one can decide what views are the right ones. We can each decide for ourselves.
Excellent. Jim, we will direct in the show notes folks to the website. Is there anything else, any other location you want to point people to learn more about you?
No, if you go to goldwaterinstitute.org, and we've got a whole page set up to discuss the campus speech issue, so check that out.
And all kinds of other fascinating topics that you guys are working on.
Oh yeah, we could go on for as long as you like on all of the things we're working on, speech related and all of our other freedom initiatives.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I think we definitely appreciate it. Thanks as always for listening. Remember to tell a friend. Feel free to share us on social media. And as always, keep questioning, because the struggle is real. Thank you, man.
My pleasure.
Well done. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.